Something has shifted, and they can feel it in their bones. Not intellectually, not through anything you've said, or any obvious change you've made, but through some deeper nonverbal transmission that bypasses all their defenses and hits them at the level where they actually live, beneath the defended exterior, beneath the rationalizations, beneath all the stories they tell themselves about not needing anyone. You're done. Genuinely, completely, irreversibly done. And the avoidant knows this with certainty that terrifies them precisely because it didn't come through the logical channels their defensive system can manage. You didn't announce it dramatically. You didn't give speeches about how you can't do this anymore. You didn't threaten or issue ultimatums or make it into the kind of overt conflict they could dismiss or defend against or wait out until you calmed down. You simply shifted internally from hoping they'd change to accepting they won't, from organizing your life around the possibility of them showing up to building life that assumes their absence, from being emotionally invested in whether they pursue you to being genuinely indifferent about their choices. And this internal shift, this energetic withdrawal of your investment, this fundamental reorientation of your emotional center away from them, they can feel it. Not because they're particularly intuitive or emotionally attuned. Avoidants are typically terrible at reading emotional nuance when it requires them to be vulnerable or aware of others' feelings. But they can feel this specific shift because it represents direct threat to their defensive structure, because it activates every abandonment wound they've spent their life protecting against, because their nervous system is exquisitely calibrated to detect the exact moment when someone stops being available to them, even though they're the ones who've been creating distance. The avoidant's entire defensive system is built around maintaining control through being the one who withdraws, the one who creates distance, the one who decides when to engage and when to retreat. But your being done strips them of all control. They didn't decide this. They didn't initiate your leaving. They didn't get to manage the distance or control the terms. You simply withdrew your emotional availability so completely, so quietly, so internally, that by the time they can feel it, it's already final. There's no negotiation point, no conversation to have, no way to convince you to stay because you're not angry or hurt in ways they could address. You're simply finished. And the avoidant can feel this finality, even though you haven't said a word, can sense your complete emotional departure, even though you might still be physically present, can detect that the door is closed, even though no dramatic exit occurred. The feeling they're experiencing isn't about anything you're doing. It's about what you've stopped doing, stopped orienting toward them, stopped investing in the possibility of them, stopped making space in your emotional life for their return. And this absence of your orientation, this withdrawal of your energy, this fundamental shift in your stance toward them, from invested to indifferent, this is what they're feeling. It's hitting them with force that contradicts every story they told themselves about not needing you, about being fine with distance, about relationships being optional. Their nervous system is registering your emotional departure as emergency that their conscious mind can't rationalize away. And this is when the avoidant finally pays attention. Not because you pursued them, not because you expressed your pain eloquently, not because you convinced them they should care, but because they can feel you're done, and the feeling activates every wound and every fear they've been defending against, forcing them to finally reckon with what they're losing at the exact moment when losing it has become inevitable. The specific signs that communicate to the avoidant's nervous system that you're actually done. The avoidant doesn't consciously process, "she's done with me," through logical analysis. They feel it through specific energetic and behavioral shifts that their nervous system detects and responds to with alarm. Understanding what signals you're sending helps you recognize why they're suddenly paying attention. Your energy has completely withdrawn from the dynamic. You're no longer emotionally leaning toward them, no longer creating opportunities for connection, no longer holding space for their potential return. The most fundamental shift they can feel is the withdrawal of your energetic orientation. Previously, even when you weren't actively pursuing, even when you were trying to give them space, even when you were attempting to be less available, some part of your energy was still oriented toward them. You were still creating opportunities for them to engage, still hoping they'd reach out, still organizing some part of your emotional life around the possibility of reconnection, still leaving the door open. But now that orientation is gone. You're not leaning toward them emotionally. You're not creating openings. You're not hoping or waiting or organizing around them at all. Your energy has completely withdrawn and reoriented toward your own life, your own goals, your own future that doesn't include them. This energetic withdrawal is palpable even though it's nonverbal. The avoidance nervous system, which has been unconsciously relying on your orientation as safety net, suddenly registers the absence of that orientation and responds with alarm because the safety net has disappeared without their permission or control. You've stopped trying to understand them or explain their patterns. The empathic attunement they took for granted has been withdrawn, and they can feel the absence of your care. Throughout the relationship, you were trying to understand them, trying to make sense of their patterns, trying to see beneath their defenses, trying to explain to yourself, and sometimes to them, why they behaved the way they did. This empathic effort was constant background presence. You thinking about them, trying to decode them, working to understand what was happening in their internal world. But now you've stopped. You're not trying to understand anymore. You're not analyzing their behavior. You're not making excuses for their patterns. You're not invested in figuring out what's going on with them. This cessation of empathic attunement is something they can feel, even though they probably took it completely for granted while it was present. The absence of your care, your caring enough to try to understand, registers as withdrawal that their system detects. They were being held in your awareness, and now they're not. And the loss of being held this way creates emptiness they can feel, even if they can't articulate what's changed. Your responses have become neutral or minimal. No emotional charge, no investment, no sign that their behavior affects you one way or another. When they reach out now, if they reach out, your responses are different. Not angry, not hurt, not hopeful, just neutral, minimal, polite but distant. No emotional charge, no sign that their contact matters to you particularly. No indication that you're organizing your schedule or your emotions around their engagement. Previously, even when you were trying to be less available, your responses carried emotional content. Hope that this contact meant they were coming back, hurt that they'd been absent, some investment in what their reaching out signified. But now, your responses are flat. They're getting words back, but no emotional connection. And this flatness communicates more powerfully than any angry message could communicate that you're done. The emotional charge, even negative charge, meant they still affected you. The absence of charge means they don't affect you anymore. And this absence is what they can feel. They're not getting the emotional response they're accustomed to getting. And the absence of that response signals that something fundamental has changed in your internal stance toward them. You're no longer available for their hot and cold patterns. When they withdraw, you don't pursue. When they return, you're unavailable, breaking the cycle they depended on. The hot and cold pattern worked because you participated. They withdrew, you pursued or waited. They returned, you accepted them back. This cycle was reliable and allowed them to manage intimacy through creating and closing distance at will. But now the cycle is broken. They withdraw, and you don't pursue. You just continue with your life. They return or attempt to return, and you're not available. Not because you're playing games, but because you've genuinely moved on with plans and commitments that don't include them. The pattern they depended on for maintaining defended control has stopped working because you're no longer participating. And this breaking of the familiar cycle is something they can feel viscerally. Their nervous system has been conditioned to expect specific responses from you at specific points in the cycle. When those responses don't come, when the cycle doesn't complete as expected, their system registers this as rupture that signals danger. The predictability they relied on is gone, which means their control is gone, which activates every abandonment wound they've been protecting against. There's a finality in how you've reorganized your life. Your schedule, your priorities, your social connections no longer include space for them to re-enter. You've made changes that communicate permanence. Maybe you've moved. Maybe you've started new job or new project. Maybe you've developed new friend group or new routines. Maybe you've begun dating someone else. Whatever the specific changes, they add up to clear signal. You've reorganized your life around their absence rather than around the possibility of their presence. There's no obvious space where they would fit anymore. No schedule opening where they could slide back in. No emotional availability that would allow them to resume the position they previously occupied. This reorganization is something they can sense even without knowing the specific details. They can feel that your life has moved on in ways that don't include them, that the space they used to occupy has been filled with other things, that you're not holding open the possibility of their return. This sensed permanence is what makes your being done feel different from previous times you've been upset or distant. Previously, even when you were hurt, there was still space for them. Now, that space is gone, and they can feel the absence of it. You're no longer emotionally reactive to them, whether they're present or absent, warm or cold. You remain consistently centered in yourself, rather than responding to their fluctuations. The clearest signal that you're done is your complete lack of reactivity to their behavior. Previously, their actions affected your emotional state. Their withdrawal made you sad or anxious. Their warmth made you hopeful or relieved. Their absence made you think about them constantly. Their presence made you reorganize your emotional world around them. Your emotional state was reactive to theirs, moving in response to their movements, adjusting to their temperature, organizing around their availability. But now you're not reactive. Whether they're present or absent, you remain consistently yourself. Whether they're warm or cold, your temperature doesn't change. Whether they engage or withdraw, you continue with your life at the same pace, in the same direction, with the same center. This lack of reactivity is the ultimate signal that you're done, because it means they no longer affect you. And if they don't affect you, they don't matter to you in the way they used to matter, which means they've actually lost you. And this loss, this absence of your reactivity, is what they can feel most powerfully. Why the avoidant can feel your done-ness. Even though they're typically emotionally unavailable, the paradox is striking. The avoidant who seemed completely oblivious to your needs throughout the relationship suddenly becomes exquisitely attuned to your emotional withdrawal. Understanding why they can feel this specific shift when they couldn't feel anything else helps you see what's actually happening. The avoidant's nervous system is hypervigilant for abandonment, even while their conscious mind denies needing anyone. Your withdrawal activates primal wound that no amount of defensive rationalization can suppress. The avoidant's conscious story is, I don't need anyone, I'm fine alone, relationships are optional. But this conscious story is defending against opposite reality. Their nervous system is exquisitely sensitive to abandonment because their core wound is precisely about being abandoned or emotionally neglected in childhood. So while their conscious mind maintains the story of not needing, their nervous system is constantly scanning for signs of abandonment. Your previous pursuit or availability kept their nervous system calm. You weren't abandoning them, you were consistently there. But your withdrawal activates the primal wound directly. The nervous system's alarm system overrides the conscious defensive story. They can feel your withdrawal because feeling abandonment is what their entire nervous system has been organized around, detecting and preventing. And your being done represents the exact abandonment scenario their wounds have made them hypersensitive to, even while their defenses were insisting. Abandonment isn't possible because they don't need anyone anyway. They can feel the absence of your attention because they were depending on it more than they acknowledged. The supply of validation your orientation provided is suddenly gone, and the loss is palpable. Throughout the relationship, your attention was feeding something in them even while they were pushing you away. Your care about them, your thinking about them, your trying to understand them, your emotional investment in them. This attention was validating their significance, proving they mattered, confirming they were worth someone's sustained focus and care. They were receiving this validation while maintaining defended position, getting to feel significant through your attention without having to reciprocate vulnerably. But now, your attention is gone. The supply of validation through your orientation toward them has been cut off, and they can feel this loss because something they were depending on, even while denying dependence, is suddenly absent. The feeling isn't necessarily conscious recognition. I was depending on her attention. It's visceral sense that something that was sustaining them is gone, creating void they can feel, even if they cannot name what created it. Your emotional withdrawal removes the safety net they didn't know they were relying on. Suddenly they're experiencing the isolation their defended position actually creates without your presence buffering it. The avoidant maintains defended independent position while simultaneously being buffered from the full consequences of that position by your presence. You were there, you cared, you were available. So even while they were maintaining distance, they weren't experiencing complete isolation because you were still present, still caring, still available when they wanted engagement. But now you're gone. The buffer is removed. They're experiencing what their defended position actually produces: genuine isolation, absence of someone who cares about them, no one thinking about them or holding them in awareness or being available when they might want connection. This is the natural consequence of their defended independence, but they've never experienced it fully because your presence was preventing them from feeling it. Now they're feeling it, and it's not what they expected. The isolation is more profound, more painful, more intolerable than they anticipated, and they can feel this specifically because it's new experience. The buffer that was protecting them from experiencing the full consequence of their patterns has been removed, and now they're facing what their defended approach to relationships actually produces. They're feeling your indifference more than they ever felt your care, because indifference represents loss of significance that contradicts their ego's need to matter. Throughout the relationship, you cared. Even when you were hurt or frustrated or expressing needs that weren't being met, you cared. Your caring was constant. And because it was constant, they could take it for granted, could not feel it particularly, could not register it as gift. But now you don't care. Your indifference is palpable, and indifference is something the ego cannot tolerate in ways that caring can be taken for granted. Caring means they matter. Indifference means they don't matter. The avoidance ego needs to matter even while maintaining defended position. Your indifference threatens the ego's sense of significance in ways your caring never threatened their defenses. They can feel your indifference because it's creating void in their sense of self. The validation that your caring provided is gone, and what remains is recognition that they don't matter to you anymore, which the ego experiences as intolerable loss of significance. The feeling of your indifference is more powerful than the feeling of your care ever was, because loss of significance is more threatening to the ego than presence of significance is reassuring. The avoidant can feel your boundary enforcement even when it's silent. The energetic no you're maintaining creates force field they run into whenever they imagine re-engaging. You've set boundary, not necessarily spoken boundary, but internal boundary, energetic boundary. The boundary is, I'm not available for this anymore. And this boundary, even though it exists in your internal world and hasn't necessarily been announced, creates force field that they can feel when they imagine reaching out or re-engaging. Their imagination of contacting you hits your boundary, the sense that you wouldn't be receptive, that you've closed the door, that there's no space for them anymore. This is different from previous times. They've imagined reaching out and sensed your openness, your availability, your hope that they would contact you. Now, when they imagine reaching out, they feel your no. They feel the boundary. They feel the closed door. And this feeling prevents them from reaching out. Or, if they do reach out, prepares them for reception that confirms what they already felt. You're not available anymore. The boundary you're holding internally is being transmitted energetically in ways their nervous system detects even though no words have been spoken. What happens inside the avoidant when they feel you're actually done, and why it creates panic they can't defend against? The moment the avoidant feels with certainty that you're done, specific process unfolds internally that overwhelms their typical defensive strategies. Understanding what they're experiencing helps you see why your doneness finally creates the impact that your pursuit never created. Their sense of control over the dynamic completely collapses. They've lost the power to decide when to engage and when to withdraw because you've made that decision permanent without their input. The avoidant sense of safety in relationships comes from feeling in control. They decide when to be close and when to be distant. They determine the intimacy level through their withdrawal or engagement. They control whether relationship continues through their choice to stay or leave. This control is what makes relationship tolerable despite their wounds. But your being done strips them of all control. You've decided the relationship is over. You've determined the distance is permanent. You've made choice without their participation or permission, and they have no way to reverse your decision because your decision isn't based on anger they could apologize away or hurt they could address. It's based on fundamental shift in your orientation that they cannot control or manipulate or wait out. This complete loss of control creates panic that their usual defenses cannot manage because their defenses work through maintaining control, and control has been stripped from them by your unilateral withdrawal. They're experiencing abandonment. They've spent their entire life structuring their psychology to avoid, and they're experiencing it as direct result of the defensive behaviors that were supposed to prevent it. The ultimate irony hits them viscerally. They've been abandoned. The thing they were defending against through all their patterns, through withdrawal, through emotional unavailability, through maintaining distance, has happened anyway. And it happened specifically because of the patterns they were using to prevent it. They pushed you away to avoid being abandoned, and the pushing away is what caused the abandonment. They created distance to protect against loss, and the distance is what produced the loss. They maintained defended position to avoid being hurt by someone leaving, and the defended position is exactly what made you leave. This recognition that their defenses produced the outcome they were designed to prevent creates crisis in their psychological system. If the defenses don't work, if the patterns produce the exact thing they were meant to prevent, then what's the point of maintaining them? But they cannot easily abandon patterns that have been their entire approach to relationships for decades. So they're stuck between continuing patterns that clearly don't work and facing the terror of dismantling defenses that feel like their only protection. The finality you're communicating triggers their fear of permanent loss in ways that temporary distance never triggered. Because temporary distance they could always reverse, but this permanence is beyond their control. They're accustomed to temporary distance, they create it regularly. Others have created it in response to their patterns. But temporary distance always resolved. Either they came back or the other person accepted them back. Distance was reversible, controllable, not actually permanent. But what they're feeling from you is different. This isn't temporary distance. This is permanent closure. This is done in ways that doesn't feel reversible. And permanence is what they haven't had to face before because they've always maintained ability to reverse course, to reconnect if they decided they wanted to. Your permanence, your done-ness that feels final and unshakable, confronts them with loss that isn't reversible through their usual strategies. They can't wait you out. They can't warm back up and expect you to respond. They can't use the patterns that worked before because the patterns don't work anymore, because you've permanently withdrawn your participation. The feeling of permanent loss is different from the feeling of temporary distance, and their nervous system is responding to permanence with panic. It didn't feel during temporary separations. They cannot rationalize away the feeling. Their usual defensive explanations: she's too needy, I'm better off alone, relationships are too much work, sound hollow even to themselves when confronted with the visceral pain of actually losing you. The avoidance defensive system works through rationalization. When they feel uncomfortable, they explain it away. When they feel loss, they minimize it. When they feel pain, they reframe it as temporary or as for the best. These rationalizations protect them from feeling the full weight of their choices and their patterns. But your being done creates pain that resists rationalization. They try to tell themselves the usual stories. She was too demanding anyway. I'm better off without the pressure. I need my independence. But the stories feel hollow. The pain is too real. The loss is too significant. The void your absence creates is too palpable to be explained away by their usual defensive narratives. They cannot make themselves believe they're better off, cannot convince themselves the loss doesn't matter, cannot rationalize the pain into something manageable. This failure of their usual defensive strategies creates crisis, because if rationalization doesn't work, they're left with the raw, undefended feeling that they've lost something important and it's their own fault, and there's nothing they can do to fix it. The panic manifests as desperate urge to re-engage, not because they've suddenly developed capacity for genuine intimacy, but because they need to restore the dynamic where they had control. The feeling of your doneness creates desperate urge in them to reach out, to re-engage, to restore contact. This might look like they finally want relationship or finally recognize what they lost. But the urge isn't coming from developed capacity for intimacy. It's coming from desperate need to restore control, to make the panic stop, to eliminate the abandonment feeling their nervous system is experiencing. They need to know you're still available, need to restore the dynamic where they can withdraw and return at will, need to confirm that the door isn't actually closed. The urge to re-engage is defensive response to panic, not genuine desire for vulnerable, intimate connection. This distinction is crucial, because if they do reach out, if you respond, if you allow them back in, you're not getting someone who's ready for genuine relationship. You're getting someone who's desperately trying to restore the dynamic that feels safe to them, which is the dynamic where they maintain control and you remain available despite their patterns. Once the panic subsides, once they feel you're available again, once they've confirmed they can still access you, the old patterns will return because the patterns were never addressed. Only the panic about losing control was temporarily relieved. Why? Their feeling. Your done-ness doesn't mean they're capable of being what you need, even if they return. The avoidant feeling that you're done and panicking about it might seem like breakthrough moment, but understanding what's actually happening internally for them helps you avoid confusing their panic with their readiness. Feeling loss isn't the same as having developed capacity to prevent future loss. They can feel devastated about losing you while being completely incapable of behaving differently in renewed relationship. The avoidant feels your doneness, feels the loss, feels the panic, feels devastation about losing you. All of these feelings are real, but feelings don't create capacity. Feeling loss means they recognize they've lost something valuable. It doesn't mean they've developed the capacity to maintain something valuable if given another chance. The patterns that caused the loss, the withdrawal, the emotional unavailability, the hot-cold behavior, the defended position that prevented genuine intimacy, these patterns haven't changed just because they're now experiencing the consequences. If they came back, if relationship resumed, the patterns would re-emerge because patterns are nervous system level responses that don't shift through feeling bad about their consequences. They can feel terrible about losing you while being exactly as incapable of showing up differently as they were before they lost you. The feelings are information about what they've lost. The feelings are not evidence of transformation that would prevent them from repeating the patterns that caused the loss. Their desperate reaching out, if it happens, is about managing their panic, not about genuine readiness to do the work required for healthy relationship. If the avoidant does reach out after feeling you're done, the outreach is typically driven by panic rather than by readiness. They need to relieve the abandonment panic. They need to restore their sense that they haven't actually been abandoned. They need to confirm you're still available. They need to repair their ego's sense of significance that your indifference damaged. These needs are about their internal state, not about building genuine partnership with you. The reaching out is about making themselves feel better, not about having done the internal work that would make them capable of meeting your needs. If you respond to panic-driven outreach, if you accept them back, what you're accepting is someone who's relieving their own discomfort rather than someone who's ready to show up differently. Once their panic is relieved, once they've confirmed you're available, once the abandonment alarm in their nervous system stops ringing, they'll revert to patterns because the patterns were never addressed. Only the panic about consequences was temporarily managed through restoring access to you. They would need sustained therapy and genuine pattern interruption to be different, feeling that they've lost. You might be motivation to seek help, but it's not the help itself. The feeling of loss could be catalyst, could be the thing that finally motivates them to seek therapy, to address their attachment wounds, to do genuine work on their patterns. Some avoidants do use the feeling of devastating loss as a wake-up call that initiates real change process, but the feeling itself is not the change. The change would require months or years of sustained therapeutic work, working with therapists who specializes in attachment, addressing the childhood wounds that created the patterns, developing new nervous system responses to intimacy, practicing vulnerability in safe contexts, building actual capacity for sustained presence and emotional availability. This is long, difficult work that most avoidants don't complete, even when they start it. The feeling of loss might get them into therapist's office, but staying in therapy, doing the uncomfortable work, sustaining the effort long enough for genuine transformation to occur, this requires more than feeling bad about loss. This requires genuine commitment to becoming a different person, to tolerating sustained discomfort, to facing wounds they've avoided their entire life. Most avoidants don't do this work even when motivated by devastating loss. The feeling of your doneness might make them want you back, but doesn't mean they'd be good for you if you accepted them back before genuine change has occurred. They feel you're done. They want to undo your doneness. They want you back. These wants are real, but you having them back before they've done genuine transformative work would be harmful to you. You'd be returning to relationship with someone whose patterns haven't changed, whose nervous system still responds to intimacy with withdrawal, whose capacity for sustained emotional availability hasn't developed. The relationship would follow the same trajectory: brief, honeymoon period where they're motivated by fear of losing you again, followed by gradual return of patterns as they feel safer and more secure in your renewed availability, followed by eventual recreation of the exact dynamic that made you done in the first place. Accepting them back before change has occurred means subjecting yourself to the same harm again. And this time, the harm would be compounded by knowing you chose to return to it, by having given them another chance they didn't use to become different, by losing more time to someone whose patterns remain unchanged, despite them feeling bad about the consequences those patterns created. Most avoidants, when confronted with your actual doneness, will let you go rather than face the discomfort of genuine transformation. They choose familiar defended isolation over unknown territory of vulnerability. The panic they feel when they recognize you're done creates choice point. They can choose to do the terrifying work of genuine transformation, therapy, pattern interruption, vulnerability, building capacity they don't currently have. Or they can choose to let you go and return to familiar defended position. Most avoidants choose the latter, not because they don't feel the loss, not because they don't recognize what they've lost is valuable, but because the work required to become different feels more terrifying than accepting the loss. Staying defended is known. Transformation is unknown. The known suffering of isolation feels more manageable than the unknown terror of dismantling defenses that have protected them since childhood. They let you go. They return to their defended position. They live with the loss rather than face the vulnerability that preventing future loss would require. This outcome is actually more likely than the outcome where they choose transformation. And understanding this probability helps you maintain your doneness, not softening when they reach out, not accepting panic-driven promises of change, not returning to dynamic that harmed you based on their feelings about losing you before their feelings have translated into sustained work that produces genuine capacity. What they're feeling, your doneness means for you, and how to maintain your position. The avoidant recognizing you're done and panicking about it creates specific situation for you that requires careful navigation. Understanding what this means helps you use your doneness powerfully rather than allowing their panic to pull you back into the dynamic you've wisely chosen to exit. Their panic about your doneness confirms you were always valuable. The intensity of their response validates that you weren't too much, weren't too demanding, weren't the problem. Throughout relationship, their patterns and their reframing made you question yourself. Maybe you were too needy. Maybe your needs were excessive. Maybe you were too emotional, too demanding, too much in ways that justified their withdrawal. They're panicked now. They're feeling your doneness with intensity that creates actual fear, confirms you were always valuable. If you were the problem, they'd be relieved by your absence. Instead, they're panicking. The panic is evidence that you were providing something important, that your presence was sustaining them in ways they couldn't acknowledge, that you were never too much, but were actually providing exactly what they needed, even though their wounds prevented them from receiving it properly. This confirmation serves your healing by eliminating any remaining self-doubt about whether you were the problem in the dynamic. Their ability to feel your energetic withdrawal proves your intuition about them was always accurate. They could feel you all along, but chose not to respond to what they felt. You might have wondered throughout relationship whether they were actually sensing your needs, your hurt, your disappointment, your gradual withdrawal. Were they oblivious? Were they genuinely unaware? Their panic now proves they were never oblivious. They could feel you. They were aware. They simply chose not to respond to what they felt, because responding would have required vulnerability their defenses wouldn't allow. This revelation is important. It means every time you expressed a need and they didn't respond, they heard you. Every time you were hurt by their withdrawal and they seemed not to notice, they noticed. Every time you needed them and they weren't available, they knew. They were choosing not to respond, not failing to perceive. This knowledge helps you release any belief that you could have communicated better or more clearly. The problem was never your communication. The problem was their choice not to respond to communication they were actually receiving. Their current panic proves they were always capable of feeling you. They just weren't willing to respond to what they felt until your feeling shifted to done-ness that threatens their defended position. The power is in maintaining your done-ness regardless of their panic. Any softening of your position teaches them that panic is an effective tool for restoring dynamic where they maintain control. This is crucial moment. They can feel you're done. They're panicking. They may reach out. They may express regret. They may promise change. They may be genuinely devastated. All of this might create urge in you to soften, to give them another chance, to believe their panic means they're finally ready. Resist this urge, maintaining your done-ness. Despite their panic is what actually serves both of you. If you soften, if you accept them back, if you allow them to restore the dynamic, you teach their system that panic works, that when they feel abandoned, they can re-engage and restore their position, that they can continue their patterns and use panic-driven outreach to repair things when consequences become uncomfortable. This lesson makes future change less likely, not more likely, because it confirms that they don't actually have to change. They just have to tolerate temporary discomfort of your distance before you accept them back. Maintaining your done-ness teaches different lesson. Their patterns have permanent consequences. Panic doesn't eliminate those consequences. They cannot restore control through crisis-driven outreach. This lesson is what might eventually motivate genuine change, though that change will happen on their timeline for their reasons, not as response to you maintaining position. Your done-ness is only powerful if it's genuine. Any performance of done-ness, while secretly hoping they'll fight for you, will be detected by their system and will fail to create the impact genuine done-ness creates. The power of your done-ness comes from it being real. You're not performing done-ness as strategy to make them want you. You're genuinely done, genuinely redirected toward your own life, genuinely indifferent about their choices, genuinely closed to the possibility of returning to dynamic that was harming you. This genuine quality is what their nervous system feels and responds to. If you're performing done-ness while secretly hoping they'll recognize what they're losing and fight for you, they'll sense the performance. The avoidant is highly attuned to inauthenticity because they perform constantly, so they recognize performance when they encounter it. If they sense you're not genuinely done, just strategically appearing done, the panic will subside because they'll recognize it as game they can wait out. The done-ness only has power when it's real. So before deciding to maintain position, ensure the position is genuine. If it's not, if you're still hoping for reconciliation, still emotionally invested in winning them back, work on yourself until the done-ness is real. Only then does it create the impact that might eventually contribute to their motivation to change. The best response to their panic is continuing your life without them, demonstrating through your thriving that being done with them was exactly right choice for you. They're panicking. They can feel you're done. They're experiencing abandonment alarm, loss of control, recognition they've lost something valuable. The most powerful response to all of this isn't engaging with their panic. isn't providing relief, isn't accepting their outreach. The most powerful response is continuing your life, thriving, building, becoming, demonstrating through your actions and your energy that being done with them was a healthy choice that's allowing you to flourish. Your thriving confirms your doneness more powerfully than words ever could. It proves you're not done because you're hurt and waiting for them to make you not hurt. You're done because you've genuinely moved beyond them into life that's better without them. Their panic exists in their world. Your thriving exists in yours. These are separate realities that don't need to intersect. Let them panic. Let them feel what they're feeling. And you continue building life so extraordinary that their panic about losing you is completely justified because what they lost was genuinely valuable and irreplaceable, and you're demonstrating exactly how valuable through the life you're building without them. They know you're done because they can feel it. Not through anything you said, not through anything you did, but through energetic withdrawal, through reorientation of your life away from them, through boundary enforcement that's silent but palpable, through your indifference that's more powerful than your care ever was. They can feel this because their nervous system is hypervigilant for abandonment, even while their conscious mind denies needing anyone. Your doneness activates every wound, threatens every defense, strips away every control. They're panicking. They're recognizing loss. They're experiencing abandonment they structured their entire psychology to avoid. And they're learning that their defensive patterns produce the exact outcome they were designed to prevent. This recognition might motivate change, might drive them to therapy, might force them to finally confront patterns they've avoided confronting their entire life. Or it might not. They might choose defended isolation over vulnerability that change would require. Either way, the outcome isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is maintaining your doneness, continuing your forward movement, building life that doesn't require them to become capable for you to thrive. They can feel you're done. Let them feel it. Let them live with what that feeling teaches them. And you continue becoming the person who's too valuable to waste energy caring whether someone who lost you finally recognizes what they lost. They can feel it. Good. The feeling is appropriate consequence of patterns they maintained despite your communication about the harm. Let them sit with it. You're too busy thriving to notice whether they're sitting with it or not. That's power. That's doneness. That's what creates the life you deserve, with or without them, but increasingly, powerfully, joyfully without them.